All right, so now we're going to talk about the 5 steps to process costing. So the first step is to summarize the flow of physical units. So we need to figure out how many units do we need to account for? How many units went into the system? And then we figure out how many units can we account for at the end. So what happened to those units, right? So the units to account for are going to be the beginning inventory plus any units that you started, right? So that's what went into the system. At the end of the period, we'll either have the units that we finished and moved on to the next process, or they'll be still work in process. We want to make sure that the units to account for, the units that went into the system, equal the units we can't account for at the end. So that's what we're trying to reconcile in this first step. So here we can see the beginning work in process plus the units you started into production. That's what we need to account for. The units we can account for at the end are the units that you completed and transferred to the next department, plus the units you still have in ending work in process. And these need to equal. So here's an example. We didn't have any in our beginning work in process. We entered 10,000 chairs into production. We completed and transferred 8,000 chairs, and then we have 2,000 chairs that are ending work in process. So the units in beginning inventory plus the units started during the period, that's the units to account for. So the 0 plus the 10,000 equals 10,000. And then that needs to equal the number of units that completed and moved on to the next department, 8,000, plus the ending inventory units of 2,000. So we can see there's 10,000 units to account for, and then there's 10,000 units accounted for. Let's say there are 8 units started during the month, no beginning inventory, and 4 units in ending inventory. How many units were completed and transferred out during the period? Well, we need to know the units to account for. That would be the beginning inventory of 0 plus the 8 units started. So there's 8 units to account for. So we need to account for 8 at the end. There's 4 units in ending inventory, so that means 4 units were completed and transferred. That would be the 8 equaling the 8 to account for. Here's another example. We've got 19,000 units in the beginning work in process inventory. 10,000 units were started into production. At the end of the period, 29,000 were left in ending work in process. So here's what we need to do our physical reconciliation and the information they told us. There were 19,000 in beginning work in process, 100,000 were started, 29,000 were left in ending inventory. So we can figure this out. We've got 119,000 units to account for. So that means we need 119,000 units accounted for at the end. If there's 29,000 ending work in process, we can subtract to find that there were 90,000 completed and transferred. So that's the first steps in the process. That's our step 1. Step 2 is to compute the output in terms of the equivalent units. So we use the units to account for just to do the reconciliation, but our focus is going to be on the units accounted for, because these are the units that we are going to be assigning costs for. That's the whole point of what we're doing. We're trying to figure out what's the cost that moved on to the next work in process inventory account, or finished goods if you're the last process. And then we also want to figure out what are the costs that we should be showing in our ending work in process inventory account for this department. So after we do our reconciliation, our focus is on the units accounted for. And so when we're talking about equivalent units, we're talking about how many fully completed units there are. If we put together the partially completed units, how many fully completed units would there be? So what happens is at the end of the period, someone from the department will go and look at the ending work in process and determine how far along in the process they are. So they will assign a percentage of completion. So the equivalent units of production, we take the number of units in ending work in process and multiply it by the percent completion. So let's say we have 100 units that are 10% complete. What are the equivalent units of production? Well, we would go 100 times 10%, right? We'd have to put together 10 units, 10 partially completed units to make 1 unit, and we'd end up with 10 equivalent units of production. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So when we're calculating the equivalent units, this is where we're going to separate the costs between direct materials and conversion costs. The reason why we have to do this is because the direct materials can be at a different stage of completion than the conversion costs. A lot of times the product gets all the materials in the beginning and then you start working on it, right? So for the cutting, we would have brought all of the wood and then we'd be cutting them. And so you have all the materials you're going to need. So the unit may be fully complete as far as direct materials, but it's in ending work in process because it's not all the way done. So it's going to be less than 100% for conversion costs. We're also going to be tracking units completed and units in ending inventory separately. So while the concept of getting the average, we all know we take the cost divided by the number of units, we've got some moving parts here that make it a little bit more complicated than just doing that. So when we're calculating the equivalent units for the units completed and transferred out, these units are 100% complete, right? They've been completed, they've been all the way done. So those are going to be 100% complete. The ones in ending work in process, those are the ones that we have to look at the percent completion, right? Direct materials may be at 100%, but the ending work in process means that the conversion costs are less than 100%. So here's an example. The cutting department supervisor indicated that the 2,000 units in ending inventory are 100% complete with respect to direct materials, but only 80% complete with respect to conversion costs. So for direct materials, these 2,000 units times 100% gives you 2,000 equivalent units. But for conversion costs, those 2,000 units are only 80% complete, so we take the 2,000 and multiply it by 80%. So for conversion costs, our ending work in process inventory, there are 1,600 equivalent units. Okay. And so we'll take the equivalent units completed and transferred out plus the ending work in process, and that tells us the total units accounted for. So I want to take a look at an example to demonstrate these 5 steps for process costing. So let's pull that up. All right, so here's our example. Crawford & Associates had 100,000 units in beginning inventory. That's our beginning work in process inventory. And the costs were 100,000 direct materials, 55,000 conversion costs. 800,000 units were started in the department during the month. 700,000 were completed and transferred. The ending inventory was 100% complete for direct materials and 60% complete for conversion costs. Then they give us the costs of the materials added during the month. So we want to figure out the units in ending inventory on May 31st. So we basically want to do step 1. We want to do our reconciliation. So to summarize our physical flow. So our beginning work in process inventory, they tell us is 100,000. Right, we're given that right here. And then, so that's what we had at the start of the period. Then, after we finished those, we would have started into production. And we're told 800,000 units were started into production. So, the total units to account for, we add together the 100,000 plus the 800,000. So we've got 900,000 is the total units to account for. So we need to be able to account for 900,000 units also. So we know this is going to be 900,000. Okay. So what can we account for at the end of the period? We can account for the units completed and transferred, as well as the ending work in process inventory. And so they tell us 700,000 units were completed and transferred. And so the ending work in process inventory must be 200,000, because that's what will get us to the 900,000 units to account for. So that's step 1 in our 5-step process. Now we need to calculate the equivalent units for direct materials and conversion costs. And that's going to be based on the units that are accounted for. Here, let's do that. Okay. Oh, let me fix this. Okay, so when we're calculating equivalent units, we're going to do it in 2 categories: direct materials and conversion costs. So, for direct materials, the units that completed and transferred, those are all the way done. So there's 700,000 units for both direct materials and conversion costs. The ending work in process is not all the way done. So we have to look at the percentage of completion for direct materials, percentage of completion for conversion costs. So they say the ending inventory was 100% complete for direct materials. That must mean that the materials were added at the beginning of the period. So we've got 200,000 equivalent units for direct materials in our ending work in process. And for conversion costs, we're told they're 60% complete. So we take the 200,000 times 60%. And so if we put together those partially completed units, those 200,000 partially completed units, we'd have 120,000 fully completed units. 120,000 is our equivalent units. So our total equivalent units then for direct materials is 900,000. For conversion costs is 820,000. Okay, so those are steps 1 and 2. We'll now look at steps 3, 4, and 5 in the next video.